So I am delighted to welcome you all here this evening for tonight's Insights lecture that is being delivered by our esteemed speaker, Professor Nick Money. I'm Professor Janet Quinn, and I'm from the Faculty of Medical Sciences here at Newcastle University, and I share a love of fungal biology with Nick here. So before I briefly introduce Nick to you, I want to share a couple of housekeeping announcements. So first of all, can I ask that you all put your phones on silent so we don't have any interruptions during the talk. We're not expecting a fire alarm, so if the alarm does sound, then please will you follow the instructions of the stewards that we will have here and make your way out of the building to the car park. And if you would like to tweet about tonight's event, then please do so and use the hashtag InsightsNCL tag, please, so NCL in capitals. And then following the lecture, there will be ample opportunity for you to ask Nick questions. So Nick Money is Director of the Western Programme and Professor of Biology at Miami University in Oxford, Ohio. However, Nick actually started life in Oxford in the UK, if my research serves me well. He obtained his PhD at the University of Exeter, and he then left to take up a postdoctoral position at Yale and has remained living in the United States since then. He is a highly acclaimed scientist on many aspects of fungal biology, and he's also a prolific author. So, for example, he's written many thought-provoking essays on several aspects of fungal biology, such as fungal consciousness, the fungal brain. What about that? He's also written many popular science books, many of which are focused on the fascinating world of fungi, including The Rise of Yeast, How the Sugar Fungus Shaped Civilization. So for me, I think Nick's books on fungi are a great read because they are scientifically sound and entertaining in equal measure. And his most recent book, which was published earlier this year, forms the basis of tonight's talk and is entitled Molds, Mushrooms and Medicine, Our Lifelong Relationship with Fungi, or the Human-Fungus Symbiosis. And I now hand the stage over to Nick. Thank you, Nick, for joining us.
Thank you. So, do we have sound? Good. No? I'm getting a mixed... You can hear me. There we go. I think it's live. All right. So, molds, mushrooms, and medicines. But first, what's the greatest poem in the English language? What's the greatest poem? And you're all jumping out of your seats. It's obviously Spenser's The Fairy Queen. Yeah? A knight was pricking on the plain. But no. It, in fact, is Milton's Paradise Lost, which I'm going to use to introduce the topic of this presentation this evening with some amendments. Sing, heavenly muse, what in them is dark, illumine. What is low, raise and support, that to the height of this great argument I may assert eternal providence and justify the ways of mushrooms to men. There we go. Begin with a lofty goal. And this being the 21st century rather than the 17th, we'll change that to justify the ways of mushrooms to humanity. And forgive John for that lapse. All right, so, don't want to show you that yet, it's a mushroom. I'm going to talk about the human-fungus symbiosis, near and far, starting on the surface of the body and all the way into the gut. And then I'm going to extend this discussion to our interactions with the fungi in the environment, both conscious and unconscious. I'll use the term mycobiome, so you're all familiar with the microbiome. The mycobiome is the term that we use for the fungal part of this galaxy of microorganisms that grow on the body. But I'm going to extend that. I'm going to look at the microbiome outside the body in nature too. So most of you here have never heard of the fungi, so I better begin by introducing the fungi. Oh, familiar. Fungi in the form of mushrooms that are these platforms for the production and release of spores. A single mushroom can release 30,000 spores a second from its gills, producing this fairy dust that you can, with the correct illumination, you can use the lamp from a cell phone, your mobile, and you can see this fairy dust. So, spore production from mushrooms. Here's a somewhat less familiar example of a spore release process. And as a researcher, one of the things that I've looked at for many years is the mechanics of spore release processes, because they're really beautiful and elegant, designed and perfected by natural selection. This is the artillery fungus, millimeter in diameter, and it's a cup within a cup, and you can see how it works from the still image on the right there. The inner cup acts as a membrane that flips outwards, and in so doing, it propels this spore-filled capsule over a distance of up to 6 meters. It's got the longest range of any of the fungal cannons, and I've got some videos here for you. High-speed video showing how this works. Ka-ching, look at that thing. And people that study biomechanics call this a snap-through buckling mechanism. And if any of you have seen those child's toys for children, poppers that flip outwards, that's the way that this works. Only, of course, this is a ka-ching, 6 meters. If you've got great hearing, you can actually, you've missed all of the best stuff. There's no problem. It's all downhill from here. You can actually hear this pop. It discharges the spore capsule with this audible pop. I gave a talk about this mechanism of spore release at a Moravian Christian college in the United States some time ago, and there was a young man sitting in the front row, and I went into all the details about how the pressures develops in the membrane, and he said, "Thank you so much, Professor Money," or whatever he called me, and he said, "You've proven intelligent design." Which wasn't the message I was trying to transmit, but anyway. So fruit bodies of mushrooms are produced by what we call a mycelium, so it's a fungal colony that's produced by microscopic filaments, thinner than a human hair, 1/10 the diameter of a human hair. And this is the feeding phase of the organism. See here this beautiful scanning electron micrograph showing the branching hypha. So this is the feeding structure. And these beautiful, I can call them beautiful because they're not mine, my colleague and friend Patrick Hickey in Edinburgh produced these beautiful images of tip growth. So these are individual hyphae that are extending. The red, there's 2 different fluorescent stains that are shown here, and the membranes are lighting up with the red stain, and you'll see it actually better in the next one. Nuclei moving. This is in real time. So you think of fungi maybe as the embodiment of sluggishness. No, there's so much movement within the fungi. And just a snippet of some recent research on fungi. There's more and more interest in their exquisite sensitivity to their surroundings. These hyphae, as they extend, they can sense tiny ridges on surfaces, and as they actually penetrate solid materials, there's this continuous reckoning with the environment. And this has led to the idea that maybe fungi possess a primitive, I'll call it primitive, form of consciousness. So it's a controversial idea, and I write about this a little bit in the book. Let me just read you a paragraph here. The potential for communication within a mycelium is probably limited to the slow passage of chemical signals, and the fungus is unlikely to be relaying anything other than, "I'm hungry, I just found food, will you mate with me?" This covers most of human discourse too. So you get the point. Fungal consciousness. Fungi do not dream or dread, But I'll leave you with this inspiring video from my friend Patrick Hickey in Edinburgh. Look at this, bioluminescent mycelia on wood chips. Now the pulses here aren't occurring on this. This is actually time lapse. They're occurring over the course of many, many minutes. What are they saying to us? What are they saying to us? Nothing whatsoever. We're latecomers on the scene. We'll talk about that a little bit more. But probably, perhaps this is signaling to insects related to the attraction of insects for the purpose of spore dispersal. But indeed, we call this foxfire. Yeah, I guess it's foxfire in the UK also. If you're walking through the woods late at night in the darkness, and you look to the side, use your rods rather than your cones, you actually may be fortunate enough to see this pale green glow. You won't see the pulses because they're occurring too slowly. All right, yeasts. Fungi don't only grow in the form of these microscopic filaments, they also grow in the form of yeast cells. And you can see an older yeast cell up here on the right. We refer to that cell as a mother cell from whom buds have cracked off the surface. So it's a different form of growth. Yeasts usually grow on surfaces or in fluid environments. Filamentous hyphae penetrate solid materials. When there's no fruit body, we call them molds. And I'm going to be referring to molds and yeasts for the next few minutes. All right, 10 themes to talk about our relationship with fungi, close by and more distant. So I used to talk a lot about what? Mold spores. And when I talked about mold spores in lectures, we could do this in the Q&A, actually related to legal issues related to mold exposure. I used to begin by saying we breathe mold spores from first breath to last gasp. But in fact, our relationship with the fungi, we need to extend the bookends because we interact with fungi from the womb to the tomb. How do we know this? If we look at the meconium, so the first deposit from a newborn, we can amplify the DNA from Candida and other yeasts from that infant deposit. In the womb, we're interacting with fungi, or we're interacting with particles of fungal cells that are present in the amniotic fluid in low concentrations, at least in a healthy pregnancy. And we know that the fetus actually quite early in development develops a swallowing reflex. So we're sipping the amniotic fluid. That's how the yeasts are getting in. Low concentrations, traces of this yeast DNA. It's probably a really good thing. It's that one of the earliest phases in the way that our immune system is being tutored for a lifetime of exposure to fungi so that we can survive this evening. It's beginning as early as the womb. In the tomb, so for those of us, a long, long time in the future when we're hopefully we're fortunate enough to receive a live burial. That's not fortunate, is it? What do I mean? A natural burial will be degraded by fungi. Fungi are important in the bloat phase of decomposition of the corpse. So fungi, including those that are present in the gut, begin to digest our squishy tissues, and they are significant. Bacteria are probably more important, but anyway, the fungi are involved in that bloat stage of decomposition. And then, a long time later, the toughest materials, our nails and hair, are degraded by fungi. There's a particular group of the fungi that specialize in the breakdown of keratin. And you know that you can find hair and nails in the grave long after our departure, but the fungi are involved in the decomposition of these toughest tissues. And what did I write down here? Not me, but some of you here have 2 cheeseburgers worth of calories sitting on the top of your scalp, your hair. I'm going to come back to calories later. But this is food for it's not food for the crows because they don't eat it, but it's food for the fungi. Why waste it? 2 hamburgers worth of, I can see lots of heads of hair. All right, so what happens in here? That's the reason you're here this evening. What happens in between womb to the tomb? All right, first of all, we transform, so I'm talking about touching now, fungi on the surface of the body. We have transformed our relationship with the fungi in the microbiome, the mycobiome on the surface of the body through our cultural practices. I want to speed up here. Malassezia, the dandruff fungus. Malassezia is a yeast, grows on the scalp. It's responsible for, when it gets too festive, it's responsible for dandruff or exacerbating the symptoms of dandruff. Okay, this is a fungus that feeds on sebum, the waxy deposit on the human scalp. There can be up to 1 million yeasts in an area of a postage stamp on the scalp. Incredible, isn't it? Scratching them right now. They're going, no, stop that. You're hurting me. If you use this, it's the world's best-selling shampoo. So I live in Oxford, Ohio. The biggest employer of our students is the Procter & Gamble company, still based in the city of Cincinnati. And this was where this shampoo was developed. It's the world's best-selling shampoo, dandruff or otherwise. If you look at your shampoo bottle, if it's got any anti-dandruff properties, you can see in the small print it'll say pyrithione zinc. There's actually a couple of other compounds. Pyrithione zinc is an antifungal agent. That's how it controls dandruff. It reduces the growth of the fungus that's growing naturally on the scalp for those of us that are, plagued by dandruff. We're changing our relationship with the fungi just by using dandruff shampoo. Just showering and lathering and using this shampoo, we're reducing the growth of fungi on the scalp. When it ends up in the groundwater, there is work that suggests that pyrithione zinc actually can damage the reproductive biology of amphibians. So there's these knock-on effects, but far more important are other ways in which we've changed our relationship with fungi that grow on the body. The oldest known shoe, 5,500 years old, found in an Armenian cave. Shoes are great things, right? Brilliant things for those of us that have a tremendous shoe fetish, right? But there's a downside to spending vast sums, I can see here, vast sums of money on your footwear, which is the athlete's foot fungus, trichophyton. The region with the highest genetic diversity of this fungus is Africa. Rift Valley, Southern Africa. That's also where we find the highest diversity in terms of human genetics. It's our birthplace. We're all, to some degree, we're all Africans. I wouldn't check the form on a census form, African American, but that's what I am genetically. Anthropologists have made the case that what happened is that originally this fungus in Africa, it was a commensal, grew on the body, didn't cause any unpleasant symptoms. We moved to cooler climates. Eventually we developed footwear. We created an enclosed space around the foot. We increased the humidity and temperature, and we transformed a harmless fungus into a damaging pathogen, something that or an irritating pathogen that penetrated the outer layers of the skin. It's a great example, it's a hypothetical example of the way in which what we've done as humans is to change our relationship, has changed our relationship with the fungi. And most important of all, Candida auris, in the news a lot. This is a terrible fungus that causes lethal hospital-acquired infections, gets into the body through catheters usually. It's a terrible thing. There have been suggestions that climate change is at the root of the rise of this fungus as a clinically significant organism. I think it's probably much more likely that our agricultural uses of azole antifungal agents is more important. We spread millions of tons of azole antifungal agents on fruit crops, but also on cereals. And those azole antifungal agents, they come from the same chemical family as the azoles that we use to treat really, really difficult, really, really awful fungal infections. And so again, this is hypothesis, but I think through our agricultural activities, we may have driven the microevolution of this fungus to become a really important pathogen. And there are other examples of this. Breathing, next thing, in the lungs. Alternaria, I call it the asthma fungus because, so the spores carry proteins that we call allergens on their surface, and I say in the book they're as damaging to asthmatic lungs as birds sucked into jet engines. If we carry out, if children with asthma, if we scratch proteins from the alternaria spores into their skin, they react with a classic wheel and flare reaction that shows that their immune system's overly responsive to this particular protein. Alternaria spores are everywhere. So we're breathing them in, and if we're sensitive, I grew up as a terrible asthmatic. What does that mean? Terribly? Anyway, somebody that suffered from serious asthma. The research linking this fungus and other fungi to asthma, that work began in the 19th century with a physician called Blackley that actually deliberately induced asthma attacks by inhaling moldy straw. And the same approach was used by one of my heroes, a Syrian-born British physician called Roger Altunen, who in the 1960s did the same kind of experiments and developed one of the first really effective medicines that was used to treat childhood asthma, and gifted me with a healthy childhood. So, yeah, I take this personally. It's bizarre, isn't it? So an asthmatic child and then a lifetime of studying fungal spores. You can't make it up. Fungi that end up in the lungs. Spores that end up in the lungs, our immune systems worship an effective functioning immune system. The immune system clears these spores, or they're actually removed passively just in the conveyor belt of mucus that passes from the lungs, and then we swallow that and goes into the acid bath of the stomach. But if our immune systems are damaged, then we can develop awful fungal infections. Mycoses, so that's the general term for fungal infections of us, other animals too. They kill 1.5 million people every year. And the weakened immune system is an invitation to fungi that we call opportunists. And so fungi that do relatively benign things like degrading kitchen scraps, growing on tomatoes in the kitchen or other fruits and vegetables, like this, it's a species of Rhizopus is actually the name of the fungus. When the immune system's damaged, they can cause these awful nasal infections, even brain infections, very, very difficult to treat. You may have heard of the black fungus in India that became a serious issue during the COVID pandemic. And in patients that have been treated with steroid medicines to control their inflammatory response to the virus, developed infections caused by this and other fungi. Very, very serious infections. And I haven't got a nasty picture to show you. I wouldn't do that, but you can, if you want to not sleep tonight, you can Google image mucoromycoses. Mucoromycosis, yeah, awful pictures. Don't do that. Fungi, very, very briefly. There may be such a thing as an onboard mycobiome in tissues like the brain. Very controversial work. Most of this work's come from a single lab in Spain, but it's pretty interesting stuff, and the work seems to be well controlled. But they find at autopsy patients that had been diagnosed with Parkinson's disease, for example, but other neurological diseases, ALS and so forth, that their brains are really, the brain tissue appears to be colonized with fungi. Cause and effect is really, really difficult to get at. Did the fungi develop as a result of brain damage from other causes, or are the fungi involved in some way? There's even a claim that there's a cryptic brain microbiome, small numbers of yeast cells that are growing in the healthy brain, but then, of course, after we pass away, they can really proliferate. But there's a lot of interest. This research in medical mycology is papers every week in the biomedical literature about the significance, potential significance of fungi in all kinds of diseases. Let me talk about these. Digesting, next theme then. 10 to 40 billion yeasts in the gut versus trillions of bacteria. How could they be important? There's far more 3 orders of magnitude more bacteria than fungi in our guts right now. But that elides the fact that the fungi are the giants of the microbial world. Moving through your gut right now, your guts, our guts right now, each of us, there's the surface area equivalent of the top of a 8-person dining room table in terms of yeast surface area. It's astonishing, isn't it? So that's a rather significant surface area, fungal surface area for interactions with our immune system that we know is enriched in the gut. And this might go some way toward explaining how such tiny organisms may have such a profound effect upon our health. I mean, inflammatory bowel diseases, galaxy of diseases, been associated with fungi, even colon cancer. There's some link. It's so difficult to get at cause versus effect, but there's something going on there, something that requires a lot more study. Oh yeah, I mean, 40 billion yeast, that's the mass of a raisin. But if you think of the surface area, do the calculations, it's huge surface area. So watch this space in terms of cause and effect, but as I point out in the book, there's some really interesting work going on. Nourishing. So I'm going to begin to talk about our relationship with the fungi now more distantly. So not actually things growing on the body, but the way we interact with the fungi. Fungi are involved in producing lots of food, right? Cheese, yeasts, or the yeast, Saccharomyces cerevisiae, source of all of the ethanol. On the planet, we've got traditional Asian foods like tempeh. It's a fungal product grown on soybean, the skins of sausages. Anyway, I did another calculation, not surface area, but an economic calculation. If we look at the combined activity of the fungi, it's worth about $1.5 trillion to the U.S. economy. So that's 5% of the U.S. GDP is based upon the activities of yeast. That's bigger than the automobile industry in America. Interesting. Here we go. All of you have eaten this, right? All of you must have eaten this. You should eat this, right? Eating this for dinner reduces the net suffering in the universe. Chickens will not be tortured, live incomprehensibly awful lives to end up as nuggets. And these taste just like chicken nuggets. And it's a British product. It's a British product. And, I mentioned this in the States, and what the hell's that actually? You can buy it in any grocery store in the Midwest now, but people still eschew it for chicken nuggets. It's produced by, so it's a mycoprotein produced by a fungus. It's a species of Fusarium that's shown on the right. And the biotechnology, the technological innovations that have gone into this are amazing. I mean, it's grown in these fermenters called airlift fermenters, and they can generate, I have to look at it every time, is it 1,500 tons of corn per cycle? It's an immense amount of stuff that's produced in these fermenters. The fungus is really unusual. It grows really fast, it's got lots of protein, and it doesn't produce any toxins, and it was discovered here, the village of Marlow Bottom in Buckinghamshire. So I went on a pilgrimage there. It was discovered in the 1960s in a compost heap there. And they've got this beautiful sign. It's an awful place. It's basically just, hopefully nobody here from Marlow Bottom, but the mayor of Marlow Bottom's here. But you see, I mean, you stand, the traffic through there is considerable. It's not like, if I were giving this talk in the States, everybody would picture, must be Grantchester. No, it's not Grantchester, it's Marlow Bottom. The sign has to be changed, though. It should say the birthplace of biotechnology. The British government should seize this opportunity because that's where the fungus was discovered in the 60s. Other possibilities, Cincinnati, so my now adopted hometown, nearest big city, the site of the first commercial yeast plant that was established on the banks of the Ohio River by the Fleischmann brothers, birthplace of biotechnology. But if you go to California and you go to South San Francisco when you're driving in, it says birthplace of biotechnology, and that sign was paid for by Genentech. So we've got... Anyway, you need to fight for Marlow Bottom, I think. All right, controversial issue here. I wrote an article that was published in 2016. I still get hate mail today because of this. The title of that was "Are Mushrooms Medicinal?" ? I said no. I was threatened with at least one serious lawsuit. My point was that if we apply the logic of Western medicine, the evidence isn't there that things like this work, right? Many of these products have been used, or mushrooms have been used in medicine, in traditional Chinese medicine, for hundreds and hundreds of years. But the evidence that by taking lion's mane capsules, that you're going to improve your cognitive abilities or reduce the probability of developing some form of dementia, the evidence isn't there. Yeah, some interesting experiments on cell cultures, some experiments on, very unpleasant experiments on rodents that suggest this may be useful, but, mushroom coffee and lion's mane. We could talk about it in the question session, but I think if we apply the rigors of placebo-controlled, double-blinded trials, the evidence isn't there. It won't do you any harm, but save your money. But I'm actually very optimistic about this, this industry for the following reason, that fungi contain amazing pharmaceutical or pharmaceutically active agents. If we look at a thing like this, the bird's nest fungus, it's a little bit like my artillery fungus. It's a bit bigger, looks like an impossibly small bird's nest with these eggs that get splashed out. This fungus is a source of very rich source of antibiotics. They've never been commercialized, but there's a ton of chemical research by chemists on the antibiotics produced by these fungi. Look at this thing here. This is how they work in nature, nothing to do with their antibiotics. Ka-ching. Oh, beautiful, beautiful thing. Splash discharge of spores. But fungi, because they're in nature, because they're in the woods and they're interacting with all of the organisms in the woods, they're bound to be producing compounds that will affect our physiology. It's just that we don't have the research, or the research is not being conducted at the level to enable us to really, discover and develop these medicines. But I know that they're out there. Of course they are. Think about mushroom poisoning. Clearly, fungi are producing compounds that have a profound effect upon human physiology. And we know, of course, that generations of antibiotics have been produced by molds like penicillium, for example. But yep, toxic mushrooms and the ergot fungus. We've got Bruegel's painting, might be in the Metropolitan Museum, 16th century, showing the effects of ergot poisoning produced by, generated by, or caused by the ergot fungus. It contains all of these nasty compounds that cause vasoconstriction and so forth. So look, clear evidence for interactions between fungi and our physiology. And, very topical example then, magic mushrooms that contain psilocybin that have actually been legalized, or they are being legalized in a few states in America. Oregon now, it's legalized the distribution and use of magic mushrooms. So they contain a thing called psilocybin. When it enters our bloodstream, it's converted to psilocin. Psilocin's a serotonin mimic, and it changes, so I'm told, everything about the way that we see the world. And in a clinical setting, in a very, very positive fashion, used for the treatment of PTSD, post-traumatic stress disorder, severe clinical depression, a recent trial on anorexia nervosa. So even just a single dose of the psilocybin from these mushrooms, very, very profound effects upon our outlook, and also used at the end of life in the care for really ill people. Yeah, there you go. What's the phrase for that? Completely gone blank there. Terminally ill people, there you go. When I researched the book, I was looking at, maybe I need lion's mane fungus, right? That's the point for that. When I researched the book, I went back and looked at a lot of the literature on magic mushrooms. It's a field brimming with non-scientific thinking, which is actually true of all mycology. It's a field that's brimming with bullshit, actually. There's a lot of it. Terence McKenna, who some of you may have heard of, and I've got a negative about Terence and then a positive at the end. I write in the book that Terence McKenna's pronouncements on alien mushrooms are one of the least enlightening things ever written about fungi, which is the competition's pretty tough. And when McKenna was writing about this, there was a craze for some mushroom paintings in French churches. So these are wall paintings, but also tapestries. This fungus, I could tell you a story about my own encounter at Plancarot Chapel. Another of my failed pilgrimages, actually. There's the painting, Tree of Life, takes us back to Milton at the beginning. A man's first disobedience and the fruit of that forbidden tree whose mortal taste brought death into the world. And all our woe till one greater man restore the blissful seat, sing heavenly muse. I should never have been a scientist. I'm a failed Milton scholar. Tree of Life there, Adam and Eve, Eve's being offered the apple. This was interpreted as a mushroom tree, a fly agaric tree in the 70s. And I thought that's just absolute rubbish. But if you look at some of the scholarship that's been performed more recently, I'm really beginning to rethink this. Look at this thing. Saint-Martin de Vic, 12th century. What is that gentleman doing? He's harvesting mushrooms, right? This is in a wall painting. Also in the same church, the Last Supper. Look at those folds in the tunics, worn by the disciples. Are those mushrooms or? It's not random. What was the artist trying to communicate? Look at this one. What are those things? And they're not umbrella pines. These are mushrooms. What were they trying to say? I don't know the answer to this. Maybe, if we go back to the roots of Christianity and we look at the desert fathers and the Gnostics, and maybe some of those early strains of Christianity, when it was very diverse, maybe there were some links with mushroom worship. Maybe there was something there. I don't know. It seems plausible. Plausible. Recycling, last theme. I hope that... So I've never taken psilocybin, but if I close my eyes, this is what I see. I've managed to. I don't need it, but I hope you get some version of this, whether you use mushrooms or not. Recycling, the last theme. It's the ultimate extension of our relationship with the fungi, our dependence on the ecological activities of these organisms, like these wood decay fungi that spin the carbon cycle, and these mycorrhizal fungi that they sustain Earth's botany. Earth's botany. Why have that? Botany doesn't exist anywhere else, does it? Alien mushrooms, Terence McKenna. We've in fact taken the human microbiome to the surface of the moon in the form of these jettison bags that the Apollo astronauts filled with their waste and flung out of the moonlanders. So they're up there. Freeze-dried now. So Elon Musk won't return my messages. Elon, you've got to get up there. Let's bring some of these bags back. I mean, you could do this, right? We could PCR out. We could see what fungi are present in those bags. And so we've at least taken the human microbiome to the moon. But what about elsewhere? What about elsewhere? So, brief reading. Kepler 1649 is an Earth-sized planet in the constellation of Cygnus, 300 light years from our solar system. With its close orbit to a small star, climate models suggest it's quite Earth-like in temperature. If Kepler 1649 is watery, it seems likely to harbor life, and if it accommodates anything more complicated than our bacteria, it's certain to be populated with fungi. Confidence in this untestable hypothesis is born from understanding the essence of fungi on Earth. Our fungi are the agents of entropy, transforming the energy captured in the web of life into the raw materials for the continuous regeneration of the biosphere. Without a group of organisms with these properties, the ecosystems of rocky worlds like Kepler 1649c would stall as planetary compost heaps of untappable energy. So they must be there. So Terence, you were right all along. Maybe. So, to leave time for questions, this has been the story of the fungi near and far. They are everywhere and will outlive us by an eternity in Mycospiramus. In fungi we trust. Thank you.